Hello everybody and welcome to Pravus Gaming and another Democracy 3 series. Yes, I know it's been a long dang time since I last played Democracy 3, like a year or something, right? Something like that. And honestly, after we played every single nation in the game, plus a couple of extra modded in ones with the presidential suite, I kind of thought that I was done with this game and that I've retired, but to this day, it remains one of the most requested series on this channel. So, since I'm in a good mood, I have heard your requests, and we are going to come out of retirement for one final challenge. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Democracy 3, it is a political simulator, kind of a political slider game, honestly. We're going to take control of a nation, we are going to enact various different policies, and see if we can create a more prosperous and secure nation and get re-elected without getting murdered, assassinated by some of the more radical elements. It's a pretty fun game, and as a very politically active person myself, it has always very much appealed to me. It's also really appealed well to my audience in the past, back when it was a lot smaller, because we had some pretty good discussions down in the comment section below. Discussing various different philosophies, worldviews, concepts, ideas, and just good lively debate. For the most part, it's been respectful every time I've done it. I'm hoping that you guys are going to continue that trend. I am perfectly happy with dissension and disagreement as long as it is outlined respectfully, so please behave yourself down in the comment section below. Now, before we get started, I will point out we are using the social engineering, extremism, clones and drones, and electioneering expansions, but we are not going to be using any mods, with the exception of Greece. I have modded this into the game, and I will include a Steam link in the description down below. This is a version of Greece that occurs just after the debt crisis begins. I think this happened in 2010. It does seem to indicate that right here. For those of you guys who might remember, Greece had this massive debt crisis. Their debt was just unsustainable. They couldn't make their interest payments. The entire Eurozone got affected by this, and several austerity measures were imposed upon them, which caused a lot of political turmoil. Unemployment went absolutely through the roof, and there's a load of tax evasion, and all of that will continue to be demonstrated in this mod. It is supposed to be fantastically difficult. How do you fix the nation that is so completely broken? So we're going to find out if we can do that today. It's going to be a one heck of a challenge, but to make it even better, let's go ahead and max out the difficulty. Why not take the most difficult nation modded into the game and then just make it even harder? Because that's just how I roll. And for our party name, we are going to call ourselves the Problem Solvers because I'm an engineer. If you guys don't know, an engineer is a problem solver, and Greece has a lot of problems to be solved. The perfect challenge for me. And our opposition will be part of the problem because they're the ones that got us into this mess. They want to drag us back into that, so you know what? They are the problem. Don't vote for them. Most everything else we're going to leave alone. The term length is 5 years by default. I don't know if that's actually accurate or not, but that's what the game has. We will set a 2-term limit because I don't want this game to go on forever, and I'm not going to touch the socialism, liberalism, or political apathy. I'm not going to have compulsory voting. I want apathy to be a thing. I have to persuade voters to actually get out there and freaking vote for me. This is going to be really difficult. Let's see what we can do. All right, congratulations on your election victory, or perhaps may God have mercy upon your soul. We are the president of Greece. There are 10.8 million citizens that we will have to take care of. Our GDP sucks. We are producing a diddly freaking squat right now. Terrible. Health and education are average. Poverty is not good, but it's not absolutely rampant either. Crime is quite high, and unemployment is absolutely abysmal. So, not the worst nation just on face value here that I've ever seen, but also really not good. The thing is, I know it's about to get a heck of a lot worse. So the modder increased the debt crisis threshold in this game. Basically, you are guaranteed to start with a debt crisis within like 1 or 2 turns. And it is going to be absolutely crippling to your GDP. You're going to have to deal with that debt crisis ASAP, or you cannot win this scenario. So we're going to have to deal with that, find a way to raise some money. And right now, my finances are looking, let's just say, pretty bad. I'm making 75 billion, I guess this has to be euros, right? Because we're in the Eurozone, so I guess that's got to be it. Expenditure, 143. So our deficit 67 billion, which means we are borrowing almost as much as we are taking in. We are spending almost 200% of our income right now. Terrible, terrible place to be in. And our debt is 541 billion euros. Again, with this level of income, that is completely unsustainable. So somehow we're going to have to turn our finances around. On top of that, we know that our GDP is all the way down to the bottom, which is creating a ton of unemployment and making our currency very, very weak indeed. Unemployment is not quite maxed out, but it sure as heck is getting there. Let's see, what's our productivity looking like? Not the worst I've ever seen, but really not good either. How are we looking as far as, let's say unemployment there. How are we looking as far as our expenditure? Right now, we are mostly spending money on state schools and pensions. That's not surprising. However, what is surprising is debt interest is costing me a full 16.5 billion euros every 3 months. That's pretty huge to have your debt the third largest expenditure in your national budget. For our income, government borrowing is currently paying for most of my features. That is your deficit. The income tax is currently what is bringing in the most money. And right here, you can see that our debt has just been skyrocketing for a long dang time. And as the global economy continues to downturn, it's only going to get worse for us. So how are we going to solve this? I think there's a couple of good ways to do it. We could go for conservative and socialist, try to become like a national socialist version of Greece, really start forcing through a load of government programs and employment issues. The idea being if the government can supply a whole load of jobs with really high tax rates, maybe we can start stabilizing the economy. That's one thing. But what we're going to do instead is I'm going to pick up liberal capitalist. Liberal capitalist is currently my favorite way to play the game. It's also the one that most aligns with my own personal views. But ideally, what we're going to do is try boosting up the GDP, and as the market starts to improve, it will gradually create the jobs that we're looking for. But before we can even bother with the GDP, we have to find a way to tackle this deficit, and that means we need to raise a lot of money really quickly. Now, we could go to the income tax and try to raise that up. It's going to take a lot of political capital. But right now, we are making, what, $48 billion or so, euros. If we raise this up to, I think about 62% is the most you can really do safely. That would give us 68 billion. So another 28 billion or so. No, 18 billion, right? 18 billion euros. That is not going to cut it. So really what we're going to need to do is pose a new tax entirely, and a big one, a really big one. I'm thinking the flat income tax. Yep. We're going to tax people with their income tax like 40%, and then we're going to impose like a 60% flat income tax on everything else that's left. So everyone's going to get taxed at about like 70-something%. There's going to be a flat and a progressive tax that everyone has to pay for. But it could potentially raise up to 112 billion euros. Obviously, I'm not going to go that high, but you get the point. There's a lot more potential for 43 capital instead of the 30 for the income tax. There's a lot more potential to get a lot more money for a much better value in terms of political capital. I think that you have to do the flat income tax. The other thing that we'll have to do eventually is the carbon tax. A lot of money can be raised from that as well. It tends to really upset everyone, and it is a drag on the economy. But compared to, say, I don't know, the flat income tax, it's perhaps the least of several different evils. It's just the problem is that Greece has gotten itself in such a bad position, we're going to have to end up doing both. But eventually, the goal will be to start abolishing the income tax and the carbon tax and leave just a nice, simple flat tax in its wake in order to keep the country sustained. But first, we'll have to change a lot of our government programs. So, how are we going to start this? Well, we're going to have to save up a lot of points. How much am I making right now? 25 political capital per turn. That means that we should have 50 as of next turn. That leaves 7 to spare. A few things we're going to do. If we're going to start off with liberals, and let's go to... actually, we already have community policing. Oh, it doesn't even cost anything to raise this up. All right, let's go ahead and max out community policing. We might as well. Reduce the street gangs and the alcohol abuse a tiny little bit. Increase liberalism membership. That's not so bad. I mean, it's not going to cost me much of anything. We might as well before I forget. So that still leaves me with a good 7 points. I'm going to get the flat tax next time, so we might as well go for something that boosts the economy. Enterprise investment scheme costs 7. This is really good if you are going to go for a capitalist playthrough. It costs a bit of money, yes, but let's implement it. It's going to greatly increase the number of people who are self-employed and get their own jobs, so that should help a lot with our self-employment issues. And it's going to increase the GDP by a whopping 5% for only 1.58 billion euros per quarter. That's a fantastic deal. The Enterprise Investment Scheme is one of the best economic boosters in the game, as long as you're okay with reducing your socialist membership. Now, for those of you guys might be new to Democracy 3, socialism membership is an inverse of capitalism membership, right? So there is nothing that actually says capitalism membership goes up. Only socialism membership goes down. The game assumes if you're not a socialist, you must be a capitalist, and vice versa. If socialism membership goes down, then a lot of capitalists are abandoning their cause and going to socialism. We need to do that sooner rather than later because if we are going to go for a liberal capitalist playthrough, I want to make sure that socialists are in the minority by the time that the election comes up in 5 years. So this is going to be quite interesting. So yeah, guys, for those of you who are not familiar with Democracy 3 and my playthroughs in this, understand that I do talk a fair bit about politics and policy in this game. I have my own personal biases, as everyone does. I consider myself to be a classical liberal and a constitutionalist politically, but economically I consider myself to be a free market capitalist, not a corporatist. There's a distinction, but a free market capitalist. But I'm not an anarcho-capitalist either. There's a lot of different terminologies that I'll probably throw out there, and hopefully people can follow that pretty well. A major donor abandons the party. Crap, that's a lot less campaign donations. Don't worry, I won't need it, because I'm going to be that good. By the end of 5 years, if I haven't fixed the country, we're going to lose anyway. Debt protection law. Debt protection agencies have been in the news because of the aggressive methods they are using to extract payment from people who owe large sums of money. Not surprising given the situation in Greece right now, but okay. These debt collection agencies provide credit to people who larger, more respectable companies will not lend to. So we can either limit their agency because they are basically preying on the weakest and the poorest, tricking them into borrowing money at high rates that can never be repaid. True, they are kind of doing exactly that. Alternatively, we can allow them to operate. Nobody forces them to borrow. Restricting the rights to recover legitimate debts would be counterproductive. That is also a very good point. It's actually one of my favorite events in the game because both are very solid arguments for completely different worldviews. Now, of course, I'm very much a deterministic individualist person who believes that if I make my own decision, then I have to stick with the consequences of those decisions. And generally, it's not good for people to be bailed out. Also, this kind of fits with the capitalist theme that we're going to go for. So I'm not going to restrict it. Though I will say I'm not really a big fan of those payday loan companies for the exact reason that I think they're just kind of scummy. But whatever. Moving on. So we have 43 political capital. That is the exact amount that we are going to need in order to pass the flat income tax. Now, this is a really interesting idea to me, and I'm going to go ahead and talk about it a little bit because I think it's interesting. It's a good thought experiment. This is one of those famous Pravus Democracy 3 rambles that take several minutes, so I apologize if it upsets some people. But knowing that I am a free market capitalist, you may not be surprised that I look at the flat tax and think that this could be a fairer, certainly simpler form of taxation that might stimulate economic growth. I say might because we don't know for absolute sure. There's not a lot of data on this. I think Russia has a flat tax, but they're actually thinking about changing to a progressive system because they don't have enough revenue. The only other countries I can think of that have a flat tax, like on a national macroeconomic level, is like Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. And they have gotten some economic growth, but the direct correlation isn't as obvious. It's hard to say for sure. So I don't know if this would work or not. Let's just put that out there. However, from a purely ideological standpoint, it is attractive to me. And the reason I think it's fairer is because, to me, the definition of fairness is to be impartial and to treat people the same with no favoritism or discrimination. And we usually think of that in terms of like male and female, race, and so on. And that's all well and good. I think you could also apply that to income level. Rich or poor are treated exactly the same under the law. They pay the exact same percentage. No one has to do any discrimination at all. To me, that's a fairer system. And I think that the progressive system is deliberately unfair, but perhaps for a good reason. We'll discuss that in a second. That's just why I see it as fair. Some people fundamentally disagree with me on that point. There are some people who have the worldview that if you are wealthy, it is because of some injustice in the system that some people are wealthier than others. And therefore, taxing the richer is fairer because we're kind of tamping down on their unfair advantage. That's their idea. I fundamentally disagree with that. In an ideal world, I think that those who make the best choices and produce something valuable, they're very productive members of society, should be rewarded with better incomes, and those who make bad choices with their lives or produce something that is not very valuable should not be rewarded as much. In fact, if anything, income inequality becomes a justice, not an injustice. Well, that's one of the reasons that some people get really upset with me when I talk about this, because I have a very different view than was kind of mainstream amongst my generation. But that's kind of the way that I see that. Now, I recognize, by the way, that we don't live in the ideal world. There are definitely some people who get their wealth through coercion, extortion, fraud. They lie. You know, those are not the ideal circumstances. Those are the examples where there should be a system of laws to try and stop them from doing that. Okay, I recognize that that's the reality we live in, but ideally this would be fair. And the reason that I could stimulate economic growth is because there is no perverse incentive for increasing your income and becoming more productive. Or I guess a better term might be diminishing returns. Some of you guys in the gaming world might be familiar with that. The idea being that the more you invest in something, the less you get at the higher end, right? So, you know, I make a lot of money and I'm taxed at a 30% interest rate, and then I make even more money, but now I'm taxed at 40%. And at some point, I take home less and less pay for every hour that I'm working. And is it going to get to a point where it's like it's not even worth working anymore? Whereas with a flat tax, that's not the case. It is always advantageous to be working and being more productive. So that could be a good thing. It's really hard to say for sure. Now, I do recognize that pragmatically, the flat tax may not be the best system. Some people call it a regressive tax because compared to what we have right now, which is a progressive tax, the lower income would pay a higher percentage than they do now. In many cases, in a lot of Western countries, it's zero for the poor. and therefore the higher income earners pay a higher interest rate, a higher tax rate than the lower income earners. If you make it flat, to me, that is literally even. However, yes, the poor would pay more, and I can see how a lot of people would be concerned about that because, paying an extra few $100s a year really makes a big difference to those people who are living paycheck to paycheck. So they are in a worse position to deal with that increase in taxes. So I understand the concern there. So my question is, and tell me if you think I'm totally off base on this, what if you then had, like everyone's in the same income bracket, but then you had like your standard deductions, right? So for every person, you have a $25,000 deduction. Like the first $25,000 you make is not taxed at all. Everything after that is taxed at 15%, period. That's it, done. You can fill in your taxes on a postage stamp, or a posted note, sorry, and then that's it. The IRS actually can shrink a lot. It's way simpler to do it that way. Would that be better? Because now you're letting the very poor have most of their income or all of their income are not taxed at all, but then everything afterwards, you still have that incentive to continue working and be as productive as you can. Would that be better? Would that have better economic growth? I don't know. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. And then things get really interesting if you then coupled that with, let's say, Milton Friedman's concept of a negative income tax. If you guys haven't heard of that, I've talked about it before. It's kind of like universal income, basic income, but it scales so that it is kind of takes the place of welfare systems. The idea being, let's say that I make $0 and then the government hands me a check for $10,000 a year, right? But if I then work, let's say I make $5,000, the government only gives me $8,000 that year. Now you may say, oh, that's less money from the government. That sucks. Well, yeah, but I come out ahead because I'm working, because 5 plus 8 is 13. That's better than the $10,000 I was having before. And you keep doing it like that. It keeps scaling. So if I make $15,000, I only get 4, but now I have 19 instead of the 10 I would have had if I hadn't worked at all. So it still keeps an incentive to work, but it also provides some governmental assistance for those who need it the most. And then when you get to that $25,000 breaking point, everything after that just get taxed at 15%. Can you combine all of those and come up with a better economic system that is simpler in terms of taxation, that provides some basic programs that actually could potentially replace a lot of welfare programs with just straight up cash grants? Maybe that's even more effective. I don't know. Would that be better? Because to me, economic growth is a really big thing. I don't care if I only have a 1% slice of the pie if the pie is freaking massive. A 1% piece of a $100 million pie is still better than a 10% piece of a $1,000 pie. You know what I mean? Economic growth is really, really important to me. So I have to wonder, can you stimulate economic growth while still maintaining certain simple deductions that provide some of the benefits of the progressive policy while still maintaining the most economic growth possible? Is that a better system? I don't know. It's just something I've thought about before. If you guys think it's stupid, you can say so in the comment section. It's just the sort of thing that I think about. Anyway, I've rambled on long enough. It's just an interesting concept to me. I don't think that we're ever going to have it. And I'm ultimately kind of okay with that because, again, I think the progressive system is more pragmatic. But it's just interesting. It's an interesting thought experiment. Anyway, for this flat tax, we're going to tax people at a monumental 62%. I know. It's ridiculous. It's a lot of money. We are going to see the middle income go way down. The middle class is going to lose practically all of their money. Everyone's going to be poor. Equality goes way down, which, by the way, I just think is very unfair. It's assuming that because we're taxing the rich and the poor at the same rate, then that just decreases equality. I would say that it doesn't increase equality, but it shouldn't decrease equality. That's ridiculous to me, but whatever. Earnings go down for everybody. Tax evasion goes up. The poor are very unhappy because they're now having to pay something that they didn't have to pay before. But whatever, we need 78 billion euros. So we're going to pass that. That should fix our deficit as of next turn. So maybe we'll start paying off the debt? Maybe? Kinda? Let's move on. It's going to upset a lot of people, though. There's the debt crisis. Okay, so this is programmed in such a way, no matter what you do your first 2 turns, this is going to happen. See, right there. Boom! This is upsetting the capitalists a lot. Self-employed, middle class is very upset, and they're losing all of their money. Everyone's upset by 40%, and the GDP goes down by a whopping 20%. We basically have a negative GDP, and until we can fix this debt crisis, we are never going to get our economy back on track, and the capitalists are going to hate me and probably try to murder me. So that's fun as well. Currently, no one would ever vote for me again. Can't imagine why. I did just slap a 62% tax on you, but that's beside the point. Curb banking bonuses. There have been calls in the media for governments to do something about the big bonus payments being made to company CEOs despite the falling profits. In cases where companies have failed to make a profit, the government has been asked to force companies to withhold bonus payments from top executives. This is interesting to me. Because as a free market capitalist, I would say don't have government. I'm pretty much a government non-interventionalist when it comes to the economy, with very few exceptions. So I would say just don't do anything. However, are these publicly traded companies? Because if they're publicly traded and they're handing out bonuses, then that's probably because the board of directors are just giving themselves free money, even though they're actually costing the owners of the company, that is to say the shareholders, a lot of their money, and that could be considered kind of a fraudulent way of doing things. So I don't know. I'm not really interested in slapping things down upon CEOs. However, I think we're going to go ahead and do this. Why not? Let's actually, mostly my reasoning here actually is to try and make the socialists a little bit happier, because they're going to be real mad, and I don't need to have socialists and capitalists trying to murder me by the end of this video. So that's going to be a thing. Anyway, all right, so if we're going to deal with some of the rampant poverty that's going to be going around because of the complete collapse of our GDP, then we are going to have to spend a little bit of the surplus. I'm thinking one thing we could do is go for something like food stamps. Food stamps is a surprisingly good program. It kind of goes against the grain of the whole free market, more like libertarian economics thing. But in terms of the game, it's really good. It only costs you 3 billion euros for maximum. It reduces poverty, though, by 13.31%. It also increases health because we're kind of mandating what kind of food people can use their money to get using those food stamps, so they have to have healthier stuff instead of junk food. Per earnings goes up, which is actually really important right now, because with the 62% income tax, if we do not do anything to boost up our poor earnings, we are going to have a general strike. And if that happens, say goodbye to your economy. Your game is done. You lose. Straight up. You can't fix both a debt crisis and a general strike. So we have to do something to improve this anyway. It's also going to make the socialists a bit happier, improve equality, and it makes me look more compassionate. Somehow taxing people for 62% does not make me look not compassionate, but giving them some food stamps does. Go figure. We also need to boost up our GDP a little bit. Now, one thing I'm going to do, because 8 billion euros surplus is not going to fix the debt crisis, we need to get more money, is I'm going to pass this carbon tax. That could raise up to $50 billion. So we're not going to do that. But still, we're going to go for something like this, try to get a lot more money, because again, I can't pay off a debt crisis in the next 5 years with only an 8 billion surplus. We need something more like 30 or 40 billion surplus. That's the only way that we're actually going to get rid of the debt crisis and start making our payments. So I need to save up enough points to go for the carbon tax for our final turn. That's 39 points, though. Right now, I am making 24. That'll get me up to 44. I can spend a few points. I need something really cheap to boost the economy. What about the National Business Council? This costs practically nothing. It's very cheap, but it also directly improves the GDP by 2.5%, and it reduces socialist membership, which means they're less likely to try and get me killed. Also, it's an attempt to throw a bone to the capitalists, though again, until we fix the debt crisis, they're going to hate me just forever. There's not a dang thing I can do about it. How is our security report looking? So far, no one's trying to join a terrorist organization, though I suspect that is going to change in the next turn, but okay. Let's find out. Now we have to go for the carbon tax. Hey, a superhero. It's Bunny Man. Yeah, crime and violent crime goes down. Okay, I mean, it's kind of a bad sign that we need that, but anything to help crime and poverty go down is good. If we can fix our debt crisis, I think unemployment will start sorting itself out and we can start boosting up the GDP. I'm not going to worry about health or education at all until we've got the GDP at least a bit more in track. Currently, 1% of people would vote for me now. That's an improvement. It's terrible. All right, let's go for the carbon tax. Carbon. There you are. 39 points. Let's implement it. This is a tax that is levied on all emissions of carbon dioxide, the main cause of climate change. It's a pollution tax, which I don't think is necessarily a fair way to call it. There's such a thing as pollution, right? Pollutants in the air. And then there's carbon dioxide, which I don't consider a pollution thing, though it does seem to have an effect on the climate. So I'm not saying it's not important. It's mincing words, but I don't think that's a fair thing to call it. Anyway, we're trying to get people to contribute for the costs that will be contributed due to climate change. And that actually is a really important aspect of the clones and drones expansion, because eventually, as our economy improves and the environment gets worse, we are going to have a water crisis and all sorts of other things. This is a way of taxing the people who are deliberately, maybe deliberately or inadvertently, contributing to the problem to then pay for the solution, right? It's trying to make them pay for it as opposed to everyone else with their tax money. So theoretically, it would be a bit more fair. It's going to be leading to a better energy efficient economy. It's going to be popular with the environmentalists. It upsets everyone, but it is a good opportunity to make a lot of money. Now, here's the thing, right? I'm actually not as opposed to the carbon tax from a purely ideological standpoint as some people might think, as a free market capitalist myself, right? Because here's my view on this. Anytime somebody's actions can have an impact on someone else who is not a voluntary party, there is a good argument to be made for the government to step in and regulate or intervene. Not always the best solution. Government regulation often makes things worse, not better, but at least you can make a good moral argument for it. In this case, people are pumping something into the air, carbon dioxide, and it's affecting a bunch of people who didn't buy the product, who didn't contribute to it, they did not voluntarily agree to it. It's just their quality of life goes down through no fault of their own due to somebody else's actions. Therefore, there is a good argument to come in with the government and either regulate it with better emission limits or to place a tax, which is a form of disincentive, right? Kind of like subsidies are an incentive, taxes are a disincentive, and you can do something like that. That is actually a solution. I'm not sure it's the best solution, but it is something that people have floated around, and I think from an ideological standpoint, you can make the argument. I just don't know if it's the best way to do it. CO2 emissions will go down because, again, as people are paying for it, then they don't want to actually have more CO2 emissions. It's going to encourage more efficiency in the economy. Actually, energy efficiency goes up. Environmentalists like it. Now, the thing I don't like is the GDP is going to go down by 3.5%. That is pretty rough. Everyone is unhappy by this. Capitalists don't like it. Air travel goes down because that emits a lot of carbon dioxide, so people can't afford to fly because it gets too expensive due to the carbon tax, blah, blah, blah. But we're going to make almost 20 billion more euros. That will take my surplus up to 26 billion. So in theory, that will be enough money to actually start making some progress on the debt crisis. We don't see anything on it right now. But if I can make a good, consistent, like, let's say 30 billion euros per turn, start paying this off, paying off the debt interests, eventually this will go away. It may take 1 or 2 more years in the game, but it will happen, and now I'll at least have a little bit of money that I can start spending on other programs to reduce unemployment, poverty, and so on, and improve livelihoods, improve education, which makes people more productive, so that will be a way of boosting up the GDP, and so on. We're giving ourselves flexibility while also tackling the problem. Of course, it means I'm taxing people technically more than 100% of their income. Don't ask me how that works, but it does. All right, we're going to end this video here. For those of you who do not know, in Democracy 3, I play on a year-by-year basis, so every 4 turns. That means that some videos are very short, some are very long. It usually depends on how much I ramble. But hopefully you guys will forgive me of that. That's one of the things that I've really enjoyed in Democracy 3 is being able to discuss political philosophy and policy. I really enjoy that on a personal level. It's one of my passions in life, and a lot of people have enjoyed that in these series before. So hopefully you guys will be respectful. If you disagree with me on some stuff like the income tax or the flat tax, perfectly fine with me. You may voice your different reasoning. As long as you have a reason, doesn't bother me at all. Just be respectful about it, and we can have a conversation. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it and you're looking forward to this incredibly difficult run of Greece on maximum difficulty in Democracy 3. If so, then be sure to hit that like button, leave a comment, subscribe, and hit that notify bell. And I will see you guys next time.